Welcome back, gang, for the first time and hopefully many more to come. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel and click on the notifications right here, this little bell, so you can get those emails every time we go live. Peace.
Yes. TBV Patreon family, what is up? This is the first pilot episode of the Standing 8 Count with the Hipster. What is up? We're going to have 8 amazing topics to get through today. Obviously, this is, post-recorded. This is pre-recorded, I should say. But that shouldn't stop you from hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button. Leave a comment, obviously, about what you think of the show, different segments. If you want me to go to a live version and try that out next week, I would love to do that as well. But first, we have to discuss the Hall of Fame inductees, Erik Morales, Ronald Winky Wright, and Vitali Klitschko entering the modern boxer category of the Hall of Fame. Salute to both gentlemen, or should I say all gentlemen, since it's 3 of them. And we're going to delve a little more into them, their careers, their highlights, as you're probably watching right now, and just everything that we have seen from these 3 great men and these 3 legendary boxers, which we definitely should cover more in depth that we may not be able to cover on the Thursday show, since we had Loma Rigo and tons of news since Ness was out of town. This was probably one that did get sort of slipped under the rug that we really didn't address, so I'm gonna address it here. Should be fun. So tune in, enjoy. Erik Morales, record of 52-9 with 36 KOs from Tijuana, Mexico. His pro debut was in 1993 and retired in 2012. Some notable wins: Manny Pacquiao, Kevin Kelly, Marco Antonio Barrera, Carlos Hernandez, Pablo Cesar Cano. Some notable losses: Danny Garcia twice, Marcos Maidana, Manny Pacquiao twice, Marco Barrera twice, David Diaz, and Zahir Rahim. Obviously, Erik Morales, such a legendary boxer, 4-division champion, beat 15 world champions in his career, and obviously his 2 trilogies with Marco Antonio Barrera and Manny Pacquiao will probably go down in the history books as some of the best trilogies in the sport's history. At age 21, he won his first title by stopping WBC super bantamweight champion Daniel Zaragoza. The next year, he beat Junior Jones, who had beat Barrera twice already, then defeated Ray McCullough in a brutal back-and-forth fight. Ray McCullough, from being from North Ireland. Salute to Ireland and all the Irish. I don't know if we have any subscribers on Patreon from Ireland, but if we do, salute to you. This all led into the year 2000, where he faced Marco Antonio Barrera in their first fight of their heralded trilogy. The Ring Magazine called it the fight of the year, and it was truly one of the best fights you can watch in all boxing. It was truly a back-and-forth affair and fight. Obviously, Barrera lost that first match, but they continued that in the rematch in 2002 after Erik Morales had beat Kevin Kelly in that span as well. Barrera beat him in the rematch, another classic fight. And then Barrera obviously finished out the trilogy in 2004 by beating Erik Morales again. Even though in these 2 losing fights, they were tight, close fights, back and forth, fight of the years, all 3 of them. And this is probably one of the best trilogies in all boxing. And then we move into 2005, the next year, where Morales started the next epic trilogy of his career and the next epic trilogy of the sport of boxing, when he beat Manny Pacquiao in an instant classic fight. Morales was the betting underdog as well. Manny Pacquiao was coming up a division. A lot of people thought Manny Pacquiao was going to be this destroyer, and Morales beat him. And then, unfortunately, after this fight, Morales went on a 4-fight skid, which included 2 losses to Manny Pacquiao. Obviously, fantastic fights, though he did lose via TKO and KO, respectively. And these fights, again, finished out an amazing trilogy, one of the best trilogies of boxing. Even though Morales came up on the losing side of both these trilogies, that does not take away from the fact that Morales, being the dance partner that he was, is a Hall of Fame worthy fighter. After these losses, he really didn't succeed in boxing anymore. Those sort of took it out of him. Those 6 fights really sort of, the wear and tear of those 6 fights had their toll on Morales, and he was visibly not the same ever since those fights. He lost to Marcos Maidana, and he would lose twice to Danny Garcia and tested positive for PED in the next few years after his losses to Manny Pacquiao, thus ending his career unceremoniously. Though I think a lot of people have looked past that. A lot of people have looked past the losses to Pacquiao and Herrera. A lot of people have looked past the losses to Maidana and Garcia and the PED abuse. I think a lot of people look past that because Morales gave us so many epic moments in the sport of boxing, especially in a dark period in the 2000s. And again, I would say all of these guys are figures of this dark age of the sport, where so many eyes turned away from it after the 90s and after the Tyson era, that it wasn't really the same. Obviously, we have highlights. In 2005, we had Floyd Mayweather versus Oscar De La Hoya. That brought back some life into the sport, but still, it wasn't the same. It was not. And Morales was a fixture in that time that provided so many classic moments that to us boxing fans, he made it feel like the sport was still alive. And when a lot of people were saying the sport was dead. So, shout out to the first inductee, Erik Morales, heading over to Winky Wright. Record of 51-6-1, 25 KOs. A longer career than Erik Morales, 1990 to 2012, two-time light middleweight champion and the last undisputed champion at 154. Some notable wins: Ike Cortez, Sam Solomon, Felix Trinidad, Shane Mosley twice, Angel Hernandez, and some notable losses: Julio Cesar Vasquez, Fernando Vargas, Bernard Hopkins, Paul Williams, Peter Quillen, and of course that draw to Jermaine Taylor. Winky Wright went 25-0 in the first 4 years of his career before having his first title shot against Julio Cesar Vasquez. So remember, this is 1994. When we think of, White's sort of prime, his run in the sport, it was over a decade after this. Just to put that in perspective, his first title shot was in 1994. White had never went past 8 rounds. He lost the unanimous decision, and he would predominantly fight in Europe, in Africa, in other nations than the U.S. in this time period of his life and his career. It took him until 1999 to leave that team that he was with. I forget the name of the team. But he would then go on to face Fernando Vargas for the IBF strap. He lose a very close, controversial decision. And it was really his second attempt to get a world title. A lot of people started counting him out. But then he would go on one of the most epic runs in the sport we have seen in the last 2 decades, when on that 11-fight winning streak that included, beating Angel Hernandez, beating Shane Mosley twice, beating Felix Trinidad, beating Sam Solomon, all in that order. And then you have the draw with Jermaine Taylor at middleweight, which I think a lot of people think that he should not have been at that division, and it was too high of a division for him to go to. And again, that was a very close fight. Obviously, it was a draw. And then White would go on to a 170-pound catchweight with Bernard Hopkins. Lose that fight in a grueling back-and-forth fight. There was a massive cut over White's eye, setting really the tone for the entire fight, where White was much more pressured to sort of try to get a finish because of the cut. He was very worried about the cut going into that fight. And that would be his first loss in 8 years. Even though with the draw with Taylor, the loss to Bernard Hopkins was the first loss in over 8 years. And then he would fight Ike Cortez, and he would win that fight in a come-home fight at St. Petersburg, Florida. That was really, obviously, the last great moment of his career. He would have 2 more losses after that to Paul Williams and Peter Quillen, and he would obviously retire after those losses. White being really the guy that everyone counted out. Nobody thought White would be the guy at any point, and he became an undisputed champion. He beat Shane Mosley twice. This was the Shane Mosley coming off of the Oscar De La Hoya win in their second fight. This was a prime Shane Mosley and off of PEDs. This was the best version you're going to get, obviously, unless you think that a PED roided up version of Shane Mosley is better. But I digress. White was that guy where he came in, as the underdog almost every time, and he beat them. He beat him with a superior jab, with just boxing. And being a southpaw, he had that deadly left hand. Obviously not deadly in terms of like one-punch knockout, but it would definitely get the respect of anyone he would face. Shout out to Winky Wright. Obviously, I've been in his gym several times in St. Petersburg, Florida. So salute to him. They obviously still love him down there. And we still love you, White. You put on some classic fights. Even though he lost the Fernando Vargas fight, that is still one of the best fights to watch, in my opinion. When you're watching a southpaw versus an orthodox fighter, and just seeing how they can go back and forth in terms of that style matchup, it is it is a great career that he had, and just salute to him. Vitali Klitschko, record of 45-2, 41 knockouts, 3-time heavyweight world champion, second longest reigning WBC heavyweight champion in history, the only heavyweight champion who's never been knocked down. Some notable wins: Manuel Charr, when Manuel Charr was undefeated, Derek Chisora, Thomas Ndomick, Shannon Briggs, Kevin Johnson, Chris Arreola, Samuel Peter, Corey Sanders, and the notable losses, which he only had 2. Lennox Lewis and Chris Bird. Obviously, we're going to get into those losses as we continue. Vitali Klitschko began his pro career in 1996. He went on a 27-fight win streak. Didn't go to decision once. Sounds very familiar of some other heavyweights. His first title shot was against WBO champion Chris Bird in the year 2000. Obviously, Vitali Klitschko was another member, along with Erik Morales, of being the guy that was holding up the sport in the dark ages, or depending on you ask, maybe putting the sport down. And we can get into that as well a little bit later. But this fight with Chris Bird ended via shoulder injury for Vitali Klitschko. It was his first loss. All 3 judges had the scorecards in favor of Klitschko before the torn rotator cuff injury. Klitschko just dominating him with the jab, the superior boxing technique, and obviously just being a tougher guy in terms of durability, in terms of punch resistance. He received a ton of criticism, though, for throwing in the towel in that fight. He would go on a 5-fight winning streak before earning a title shot against WBC champion Lennox Lewis. And obviously Lennox Lewis against Vitali Klitschko was a hallmark fight of the heavyweight division in the early 2000s, and we're obviously getting into why that is. The Lewis-Klitschko fight is still debated and discussed in boxing circles today. Klitschko was a 4-1 underdog going into the bout. Klitschko dominated the early rounds, even hurting and cutting Lewis under his eye in only the second round. And then Lewis came back in the third and delivered a mortal cut. I don't use the term mortal as in deadly, but in terms of this fight and winning the fight, it was deadly, obviously. Mortal cut above the left eye of Klitschko. Klitschko will go on to battle Lewis until the 7th round, and then the ringside doctors stopped the fight due to that cut, even though Klitschko was ahead on all 3 judges' scorecards as well. Again, similar to the Chris Bird fight, and again, another indicator of really these losses don't say a lot, because both losses were due to injury. And I would say this fight in particular really, I would say, upsets a lot of boxing fans, as we're going to talk about. Klitschko was ahead on all 3 judges' scorecards. Negotiations for a rematch unfortunately collapsed, though. Klitschko will earn a mandatory shot at against Lewis, but Lewis opted to retire and give up the belt instead of fighting Klitschko, in a move that was highly criticized and highly hated by the boxing community at the time. And for a lot of people, it was a sign of, similar to, I would say, this era of the Mayweathers not passing the torch. Lennox Lewis didn't want to pass that torch to Klitschko. And even though he was on his way to lose a fight against Klitschko, did not want to rematch him. Obviously, because he retired as a result and gave up his belt and vacated it. A very unfortunate moment, because the Lewis-Klitschko fight was a big fight in the sport of boxing for the heavyweight division. And really, the heavyweight division didn't have a big fight in the next, I would say, 10 years. Until, except for maybe Vladimir Klitschko against David Haye. That would probably be the only one. You know, so it's one of those weird circumstances where, because of this retirement from Lennox Lewis, that did hurt the heavyweight division, and because he did not pass the torch to Klitschko, even though we all knew Vitali Klitschko was the better guy. But beside the point, Vitali Klitschko will go on undefeated until he retired, beating Shannon Briggs, Corey Sanders, Samuel Peter, Chris Arreola, a ton of names, before he eventually retired and entered a life of politics in 2013. This is where I would say Klitschko's legacy goes from just a really good boxing career, because obviously the heavyweight division was very poor in his reign in this dark age period of the mid and early 2000s, in which we talk about. But him going and being a part of the Ukrainian crisis, being part of the Ukrainian revolution, he would be a crucial part of that revolution, a key figure in keeping the capital of Kiev from going into complete chaos. He would go on to become the mayor of that capital in Kiev, And he would not only become a massive cultural icon in boxing, especially in Europe, but he would also become now this cultural icon in politics. The video of Klitschko holding up, angry mobs and having bombs and stuff go off around him, it is really surreal when you look at it. And especially, I remember watching that live at the time and knowing Vitali and following his career as a boxing fan in the mid 2000s and in the 2010 in that period. That was a moment where I was like, wow, Klitschko transcended the sport of boxing in that moment. And you may not think about it, but that was a Muhammad Ali level moment. That was a moment of a boxer using his platform, and the Klitschkos being so revered in Eastern Europe because of their pedigree, because of their boxing pedigree and their accolades, and them really having the Klitschko era of 2006, 2015. That was the Klitschko era, really. And now we saw that being used for an act of good, an act of social justice in a way. So just salute to Klitschko for really using his leverage and his power and his influence to help stop a massive civil war from happening. Because there were moments where there were two angry crowds approaching each other, and Vitali Klitschko was the man in between them. He was the 6'8" or 6'9" giant that he was, holding up both crowds with the blowhorn and saying, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to fight. We're going to deal with this peacefully. And that to me means so much more than this absolutely great career they had in the sport of boxing. So just salute to Klitschko, salute to Winky Wright, salute to Erik Morales, all three legends, all three obvious Hall of Famers. All three should be talked about for future generations to come. Yeah, that concludes the first part of the Standing 8 Count with the Hipster. What is up, TBV family? Yes, YouTube has been cutting funding to their channels as of late, and with net neutrality going through its process, the internet is changing. If you want to keep your favorite channel intact, coming up with tons of content, and plus get hours and hours of extra content, head over to patreon.com/ThaBoxingvoice to become a member of the TBV family and help support the channel. Peace. Ain't no other sight in the game, 'cause see the boxing voice.